So, welcome to Conversations about AI. I'm here with John from BlueTeam AI, and they're working on something very exciting around security and AI. I do a lot of applications, as you know, if you've been following my LinkedIn messages. I do a lot of applications for AI, specific generative AI in enterprise use cases. And more, it's become very, very obvious that we need to start thinking about AI governance and AI security. So, turning it over to my colleague John, we'd love to have a conversation about AI governance.
Hi, this is John from Blue Team AI. Thanks for joining us. We want to discuss the intersection between AI security and compliance. And I'm so thrilled to have Kartik here because Kartik, you're a real thought leader in AI governance. And I thought we would start off talking about, there's this rising kind of topic or area of expertise, which is being called TRISM, right? Artificial Intelligence, Trust, Risk, and Security Management. And it's essentially an entirely new threat surface for the enterprise. And I think I've heard you talk about how you think that we're underestimating the need to focus on this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I work with a lot of different enterprise companies. Most of my work has been with enterprise companies in the past. And one of the things I think we are underestimating is how much we don't know about generative AI in general. Where are the surface areas where, there are potential attacks to happen? Primarily because it's new, but also because we haven't really, from a governance perspective, caught up, for lack of a better word, caught up in the sense of the risk associated with it, or how to even formulate the risk associated with it. A lot of the work that I do now is actually more around edification of understanding the risk. Enterprise acquire quite a few AI technologies, either through acquisitions or from vendors. And one of the key, aspects that's missing is the provenance of those AI technologies. How were they trained? Do we have data rights to those training data sets? How were they validated, verified? All of these little things are very well understood at the data science level, but they're not well communicated at the executive leadership level, or they're not well understood from a legal and compliance and risk level. And I think that's going to change, and it's very important we have those conversations.
Right. I mean, cloud came along as a new computing model, and we all exfiltrated our data to the cloud and
Yeah,
then realized that, oh my goodness, we don't have good, data governance of that. We don't have good
right.
provenance of our keys. We don't really necessarily have confidence that we have adequate observability, particularly across vendors, right? Um, and one of the things that I see now is, in the area, those of us who are professionals who try to work on this for a living, right? We have to be proactive. We have to think about how we measure risk. We have to think about what layers of defense are necessary because if you think about kind of a nightmare scenario, it's when the average person doesn't trust a process anymore because they're afraid AI is sinister and or misusing their data, right? Like if you think about just going in for a checkup and you believe that everything from your diagnosis to how um, the billing works, you've got to be able to trust the computing platform that you're relying on, right?
Absolutely.
And what is
I
the
think
basis of that trust? Do you have the metrics, right? Do you have you know, so good.
100%. I think it's like internet banking. Majority of the economy grew because of internet banking, but without that trust and encryption, for example, we wouldn't have the, digital banking system that we have today and all of the wonderful financial products that are coming out that are serving people that didn't have access to financial tools. The same thing is definitely happening with AI because there's also this cultural undertone with AI. Just because how shocking it is, the things that AI can do now, the uncanny valley is pretty big. If you look at, ChatGPT and some of the responses to, the AI image generated from stuff like Midjourney, there's a bit of a backlash in the general population. And I think part part of our responsibility for using it in enterprise, especially to, reduce costs, add those type of optimizations everyone's looking from anything from finance, from healthcare to automotive. There's also a rigor that's going to be starting to be expected by the general population. So as our use cases expand because AI can do more, our responsibility expands. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, responsibility always tends to be a bit of a laggard, in the tech side of things. But I think because AI just expanded so quickly that now we have to push to get that responsible AI aspect, to expand as quickly.
Yeah, like a lot of us geeks grew up reading Stan Lee comics, right? And his famous, with great power comes great responsibility. And I've never thought about that in terms of AI. That's a really interesting point. Um, so we at Blue Team AI, we have been talking to a lot of customers about what kind of defenses they want to install to ensure they have observability to AI and also some level of data privacy, right? Because
Mhm.
this is a different computing model. I think about, historically, we had computing models like, traditional relational databases and applications where they had, you know, role-based access control and there was a defined data model and you could fairly well coordinate who had access to what, right? But in terms of the way generative AI in particular works is you just feed it as much data as possible, and the quality of your responses may improve, right?
Yep,
So there's an incentive misalignment because your upstream vendor, they want as much data as possible, and they're happy to train on it, and your organization they want you to do quality work, but also they don't want necessarily their protected data to leak to an external party.
absolutely.
So we've been, working on some products to deal with that. But a lot of organizations don't really have, good mature policies in place. I know you've thought a lot about governance and so when organizations are starting off and thinking about their governance, posture and their policies, what are some of the ways you counsel them?
That's a great question. I think it always starts with the stakeholder conversation. Everyone understanding where the risks are, because it is a bit like being in the dark and feeling an elephant, right? You have stakeholders in legal that are worried about upcoming compliance. For example, California just released that if you're talking to patients with AI, that needs to be vetted by a doctor before it goes out. And that was a quick governance that came out of that. So legal is looking at it from very specific framework. And then you have operations who's looking at it like, oh, there's all this AI system going on, but I'm getting a deluge of information coming through at me because now AI can generate more. How do I operate to make sure when something goes down, how do I switch to a manual process? And then you have the AI expert who's actually developing these AI technologies. Is they have a lot of metrics they can look at, but which metrics matter? So one of the first things that we do now is actually put together AI governance meetings where everyone talks about which metrics are important, why those metrics are important, and actually it's the responsibility of the AI governance officer to explain why those metrics matters. So, for example, do true positives matter? Do false negatives matter? Or do the amount of hallucinations matter? Right? There is always this trade-off. So, to give a more like hypothetical example, as you mentioned, there's a lot of organizations wanting to use their data to create AI products, and they are worried about leaks. So one of the ways to do that and address that issue is to build synthetic data sets. Now, synthetic data sets are a way, but you need to add a certain amount of noise into it. So how much noise do you add all of a sudden has an impact on operations because you're improving the likelihood that operation is going to have to deal with a lot more mistakes from the AI. But if you don't put in enough noise, then you have the risk of more data leaks, right? And more attack surfaces. So there's this constant healthy tension, I would say, between deciding how much to use AI and how much should it be an AI system that's working together with deterministic factors. So part of the responses coming out of AI should be curated, right? And the AI is only used in certain locations. But again, it all comes down to that governance meeting. And we do it every quarter with all of the applications that we develop. We have that conversation every quarter and we talk about what's happening in terms of model drift, in terms of observability, what is operations been complaining about rightfully, and what is legal seeing coming down the pipeline. And then, keep iterating. It's going to be iterative. There's never going to be a perfect framework.
It fascinated me. You mentioned a new role. called the AI Governance Officer.
Absolutely.
And I think so few organizations are lucky enough to have that mature capability yet. In fact, I was talking to one the other day, and they were pretty sophisticated technology company, but they were frustrated that their vendor, in this case Microsoft, just came in and really sold them subscriptions of Copilot, and they said yes, and they bought it, and then
Right.
they were like, now what? Like, that's not a strategy. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
are we going to do more harm than good? Are we trying to, do workforce reduction? Are we trying to address employee satisfaction? Like, it's just like dropping off a whole bunch of,
Right.
books and saying, okay, now we're smarter, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. So I was very fascinated by that. Do you think that AI governance is going to be like a common function that arises in organizations?
I absolutely think so. Exactly like a security officer or a compliance officer that we have in any other use case in the technology stack, right? We have folks that are full-time focused on how data moves through an organization, what services are connected to which plane, either externally or internally. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI governance, right? We're going to have a role who's able to understand the macro risk, legal and downstream risk to consumers of AI, like you mentioned before, where regular people are depending on this technology now for very powerful use cases, making decisions about their health, making decisions about how Waymo goes from one location to another location. I mean, recently there was something that I saw very interesting and potentially unnerving, where a woman was trapped in a Waymo because someone was standing in front of the Waymo and they could move and they were, these are the type of situations that are going to arise as more and more of our daily life gets handed over to AI applications. And when that happens, it's going to require us to think about safety of the people using our AI, safety of the organizational risk at hand. And I think that's such a unique role because AI practitioners don't think in terms of risk management, right? There's this concept of boom theory. You know, you have to think about, you have no clue about the biggest risk because those are the biggest risk because you don't know about them, the unknown unknowns. So you have to always estimate that there is going to be a boom moment with AI, as in something is going to explode. In that scenario, you need to think about what are you going to do right after the boom moment and practice that, right? So in this case, in one of the examples I gave is where operational efficiencies are brought in by AI. What happens if the AI system just goes down one day? What is the organization going to do? And we practice that. That's actually kind of like a drill that we do.
Okay,
Uh,
so something like a business continuity plan that we've always had, or DRP, disaster recovery, we need to think about applying that to AI as well as it becomes more
Absolutely.
critical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because AI still hasn't completely realized what I would say maturity in terms of providing sustained services. And we're seeing this with, Q Star, which was deployed by Amazon. They had to pull the plug on it fairly quickly. Google, recently had the mishap of deploying, a large scale AI system for their search functionalities, and they had to pull that down. That's going to continue to happen as we find more uh, you know, um, threat models to AI. And so we always have to assume at some point we're going to have to turn off AI and come back in the driver's seat. And the more seamless that is, the better the overall organization is going to be in, you know, long-term operational efficiency, not just, oh, short-term, within a quarter, we shipped 10,000 more widgets, right? It's more in the sense that, okay, over the next 10, 20 years as this organization evolves, and they're adopting AI, we've learned from the mistakes early on as quickly as possible.
You made me think about a fun exercise we held, which is we at BlueTeam AI had sponsored the red teaming village up at B-Sides, Vancouver, and we had all these security professionals and ethical hackers and so forth in. And we had a challenge whereby you could come in and try to extract secrets simply through prompt engineering from five progressively more sophisticated models, right?
Right.
And 155 people participated in that. And you had a 10-minute time box.
Right,
and we were giving really cool prizes if you got all five. Well, 43 people compromised all five levels
right,
of, so
right,
we ran out of prizes. People think that the implicit, the large language models that are hosted by hyperscalers are implicitly secure,
right.
but I think they don't realize. Uh,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, this is why the tension between small language models and large language models is always a conversation in enterprises. Adopting hyperscaler large language models means you're also adopting a lot more security risk, right? That's why most of the applications that I work on use very specialized language models. They only do one or few things, classifications, clustering, or a few other known like natural language understanding tasks that we know how to measure really well.
Oh, interesting. So using more specialized purpose-built models can help reduce your effective threat surface than one
Absolutely.
general
You know,
purpose.
because some of the models can only say true or false. Really hard to attack that one. Because if you're asked a question, hey, tell me which patient's SIN number it has in there, it's really easy to add a guard at the end that says is this a true or false,
Right.
right? And that reduces the risk, but you still get the value of the fact that it's able to take unstructured data and make a decision true or false, right?
Fascinating. Yeah.
Everyone's trying to focus on the output, but we're focusing on the intelligence.
We built a gateway, a generative AI gateway at BlueTeam AI that looks for PII in real time and redacts it and applies content moderation and data loss prevention policies. Um, and it is really interesting to see that in action at companies that are looking for some kind of attestation evidence that they have some control over data leakage, right?
Right.
Um, but lately, what we've been seeing is more companies are actually very interested in building their own private AI inference platform based on Olama and some of the open source models. And because they are reaching near parity with in terms of performance with some of the public models, and then you don't have that data leakage problem as severely. What do you think of the open source ecosystem that's kind of just bubbling around?
It's fantastic. I know the Olama team personally. I know Jeff and Michael from them. In fact, one of my previous startup, Hammer AI, we were focused on making portable AI for mobile phones and the edge. And so I believed in, privacy preserving AI from a while ago. And in fact, at Doc AI, one of the startups that I was part of it, which went public, we actually built federated learning for AI. We were the first person to do it. So I've always been you know, an advocate of open source and open models, right? And what we're seeing now, I think, is the more uh value for an enterprise is not necessarily in the power of the model. The foundation models are going to get better and better, right? Llama 3.13.5 is going to come out in the next 10 years, and it's going to be crazy. Everyone's going to love it. I think more and more where enterprises that are not AI first, where they can focus on is vertical AI. Their intelligence applying their standard operating models that have helped them win in the market, right? Walmart does things in a certain way. Walmart should really only be good at using AI that helps Walmart be Walmart, right? They shouldn't try to all of a sudden be Sam's Club, right? That's the belief that I have now. It's like saying everyone has a cloud service, right? Just the cloud service itself is not going to be the differentiator. How people use and set up their systems on the cloud service to provide different API throughputs, like some are hyperscalers on, you know, the amount of messages they can handle. Others can handle bigger messages. It's just going to be more suited to the end consumer experiences, right? It's not necessarily just going to be everyone's going to have a competing foundation model.
Right,
I
right.
think
Yeah.
all are going to eventually converge.
I can share that I've talked to a number of folks who are like chief AI information officers or the like, and um, a lot of folks are really interested in what's happening with open source because they're starting to give pause to what you said, which is like, do I have a portable application? Do I have a vendor neutral strategy? Or am I getting locked into one particular vendor? Um, and Open source, allows them that model selectivity and routing and so forth, and the ability to integrate more of their data. But it occurs to me that you were talking a little bit about competitive advantage, right?
Right,
And your ability to quickly compose solutions based on, highly relevant data that you've integrated is
right,
is going to be a real factor in your competitive advantage, right? As an AI native organization.
right. And also the operational exhaust. The real power of the organization is going to be how quickly can they take in new data coming from their
Hmm.
customers and their operations and feed it back into the AI in an efficient manner. And you're right. I think the winning model so far in enterprise, I feel is, VLLM or Olama and running it on a stack on Helm and basically deploying your own model. Just take something off the shelf and hyper focus on the experience and fine tuning and prompt engineering. No one's done it, I would say, very seamlessly yet, but I think the tools are going to come in the next 2, 3 years for enterprise to be able to do that.
It's funny because I went to a founder meetup last night, and people were. I think we all tend to do that. We throw around, well, this is probably going to happen in 2 or 3 years, right? Because it seems like a relevant time frame that's far enough out to be meaningful, but it's kind of soon. I think a lot of enterprise customers are underestimating how fast
Yeah,
there's going to emerge new leaders in their category of value that are
yeah,
AI native organizations. And
absolutely.
they're still sitting back going, yeah, we should have some meetings to think about transformation. But meanwhile, the ability to build an entirely new workflow with, AI native tools from the ground up
Right.
is really accelerating, right?
Absolutely. I think the only advantage that incumbents have is that they already have that operational exhaust coming through their organization,
Mhm.
right? A lot of how I help these, what I would say is service native enterprises is to help them see the value in, the Jira tickets, in the Confluence pages, in the Word documents, and the Excel sheets that are used to just keep their business running, right? That get lost in the stream of,
Yeah.
SharePoint. And that's really valuable data if it can be organized well. And now with Gen AI properly extracting that and organizing it, it unlocks a tremendous amount of value, but also a lot of risk. Going back to our earlier conversation.
Well, but only if you're able to persist it, right? So I think a lot of times people don't realize that if they're, you know, simply using OpenAI or Copilot or what have you, um, they're probably not able to harvest and persist all of the
Right.
prompts and all of the generated responses. And that's gold, right? Like you could train your own internal models on that for
Really
competitive
keep people
advantage.
caching. Yeah, I've seen that. And I love that. That's one of the, observability features that you're adding at Blue Team is the ability to seamlessly just plug that in. Because every application I work with, I have to manually add in observability by hand. And it is a pain, but I think having that as kind of like the Prometheus drivers of AI is really powerful. I've seen a few other implementations of it, but I haven't seen that adoption. But I agree, like that's going to be very necessary. And I think business leaders are starting to recognize it now. Every question asked on a chatbot is really valuable insight into what your customer is actually looking for,
Yeah, I,
right?
I think there's going to be regret if for some folks who, they wake up 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, and they wish they had persisted all of their AI usage. We call it an AI ops database,
Right.
but that could be used for incredible insights as well as,
Right.
model fine tuning and development locally. So, what's an example, Kartik, of something else that you think? Um, People are going to wish they in the future they're going to wish they did now if they could look back and reverse time. What's something that your future self would come tell them?
I think spending a tremendous amount of time on factual consistency. This is a concept where, you have a gold data set that you're constantly updating and curating. It's really hard for telling enterprises, hey, you know, spend 15% of your IT budget on just curating a data set that is updated based quarterly or weekly or monthly or whatever have you. And the reason why that is so important is because as more and more AI generates content around them, that starts to poison most data sets out there.
Mm.
It's just going to seep in through the ecosystem. And people are already talking about the dead internet theories, where most of the traffic on the internet are going to be bots talking to each other, right? I'm kind of seeing that happening in a few organizations, like a few subreddits already, where bots are talking to each other and it's starting to bleed into the data sets people are training on.
It's
Um,
really scary when they start inventing their own language to talk to each other. That's,
maybe that's an advantage, but I mean, like that's the part, right? Like that's provenance of data, right? What's in your training data set? Was it human generated? Was it reality generated? But having that ground truth and investing time into it now as an organization is really going to make you that much more applicable with your AI in the next 5 years as more and more data sets become poisoned. If you, no one's done this yet, but one of the thought experiments I had is going looking at the Hugging Face data sets and finding out how many of them have watermarks from AI generated content. There's a way now that you can actually put watermark within generated content. And I think as more and more people do that, we can actually start to measure how many training data sets have watermark content. I don't have the time to do that experiment, so if anyone's watching, they try that experiment. But there is a way to watermark your LLM
last
outputs.
I checked, I think OpenAI had actually disabled that watermark feature, but it's
There's an open source version of it that just recently
oh,
came out. Yeah,
yeah. Well, I think we just touched on another thing, which is like the role of continuous learning. I think a lot of us who've had career in enterprise technology have always thought of information as being very cumulative around, topics like workflow automation and, um, you know, data preparation and so forth, analytics. But in the field of AI, we are learning new things, but the things that we thought we knew even 6 months ago are becoming invalidated with
right,
new information. So we have to constantly update our entire data set.
right.
And a lot of you know, a lot of stuff becomes stale pretty fast in AI, right? You have to.
Actually, I have a counterpoint to that. As I
Mm,
mentioned, if you start capturing data now, very similar to what you said, capturing
hmm
today, you can go back and remine it,
hmm
right? Once you understand something different about your business, you can go back and prompt that same data set in a different way. And I think that's the real power of having historically validated data set that you carry with your organization, like a public company would carry with them for the next 50 years. It's going to be about their data that as more and more services become AI generative.
Oh, that's
Um,
brilliant. Yeah, we actually have a policy framework where you can define sort of your data security policy as it applies to generative AI. And someone did ask recently, but could I make a what if policy and
that's
say if I had applied this, right, to look back at the corpus of previously recorded generative responses that what would have been a violation under this policy, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And the only thing we can do is, it's always expensive to store new data, but it's always very inexpensive to do retrospective studies, not just from a risk perspective, but also from let's think about a new product completely. And, how do we think about a new product without necessarily having to kick off a full new market research, et cetera? Hey, just try it out on the old data set, turn them into personas, see what those customers would potentially do and say if you said the same things, right? And or said, different things in your sales, in your marketing pitches, stuff like that. These just different type of scenarios. One of the reasons why this hasn't been possible today is because mining old data was such a hard thing to do. But now with generative AI, it's much, much easier. Put all of that into a vector database, do RAG augmented generation, ask it anything you want to ask, right? As long as you focus on factually consistent data sets, right? If you build truth into this data set over and over and over and curate it, I think it's basically like the family jewels of that enterprise.
That's fantastic. Um, I wanted to, as we begin to wrap up here, I wanted to see about what kind of really actionable nuggets we can give folks for like taking first steps, doing simple things to just get started on, improving their security posture and thinking about data privacy and security and the utility of their data. And, what I'd like to offer, and then I'd like to get your tip, is just start with observability, discovering shadow AI
Right.
usage. I don't think I've met a single CISO that can tell me confidently what the degree of AI usage is in their own company, right? Because it was all shadow adopted and viral. And so I think just getting, we can help with that, or there's other organizations that can help you essentially. Aggregate your usage by vendor and then make that identity aware so you can do things like workforce transformation planning or just understand, what data sources are being used or not being used. Just starting with observability. What would be one of your tips of like what's a first thing to do to get started here for somebody who hasn't really begun the journey of AI governance?
100%. I think what you said is very salient. And what I would like to add to that is start having conversations directly with AI practitioners and people who are going to be using AI. So once you start understanding where AI is being used in your organization, turn that into a governance meeting once a quarter, or if it is a really critical part of your business, have that more regularly and turn that into a model card. Know your top four risks associated with that model. Talk about them regularly. Change your top four risks as you learn more about the application of AI and where your customers and your operations are going. But it all comes down to having that conversation because the one thing AI will not be able to do is be able to gut check itself. That's where humans are really, really intuitive, and teaching that to an AI is not possible. So it all comes down to with great power comes great
That's
responsibility.
a good one. That's a good way to wrap up. Um, Also, I think for anyone who's an executive who isn't necessarily deep in the weeds on the tech, one thing they can do to help their organizations is lead by example
Yeah,
of start using some of these AI tools themselves
yeah,
and seeing what's achievable now, and then telling their staff about it, getting them excited about it, and
right,
encouraging others to explore all the new tools
right.
that are out there. Thanks, Kartik, for your great insights. It's been fun to chat with you today,
Absolutely.
and appreciate
Yeah.
all your insights.
And thanks for your time too. And looking forward to what you guys are doing next.
Take care.
Have a great day and enjoy this trip. See ya.
Thanks, Kartik. Take care, buddy.